Hey, welcome to the CyberTAP podcast. I'm George Bailey, your host. Jim,
co-host.
Good to see you.
Layman expert over here. Yeah, good to see you too.
So this is episode 2 of season 9.
Matt and Mike are gone.
They're gone. They'll be back. So if you miss their savory voices, they'll certainly pay us a visit at some point this season.
Let us know, but be nice about it.
Thank you for joining us on this episode. It's our flagship episode of Jim and I, George, leading this menagerie of a media production. Should be fun. I will tell you, I am extremely nervous. I was a big fan of the previous cyber
Golden Mike.
I am the golden
recipient.
mic holder.
Yep.
I suppose I will have to hand that off to the
TBD.
the next worthy recipient.
Our two guests already have one participation point. So,
Yeah. So
you guys are the top contenders. You want to go ahead and introduce them, George?
I will. So today we have lead instructor Jeremy Johns and senior information security analyst Phil Conrad. Jeremy, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Jeremy Johns. I'm our lead technical instructor, so I teach people things about cyber.
What is your favorite part of your job here at cyberTAP?
Favorite part of my job is probably working from home.
Lucky dog. Phil.
Superfan Phil, for those of you who call back to some of our early episodes.
I'm back in studio, so that's exciting. Phil Conrad, Senior Information Security Analyst. I have been now with cyberTAP for 2.5 years.
Has it been that long?
It's been that long.
Wow. And you discovered us through the podcast, right? Or at least one of the mechanisms?
I think so, yeah.
For OG listeners out there, non-OG listeners, Phil was our only fan for a while, and through reaching out through some emails and correspondence, one thing led to another, and now he's a guest on the panel.
And to clarify, Phil didn't have an OnlyFans. He was an OnlyFan.
The only fan. Yeah.
Thanks for that clarification.
So today we're going to talk CrowdStrike. George, you want to tee us up here? I, as co-host, my job on this is to ask the dumb questions, so you don't have to. So
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So CrowdStrike, we all lived it, whether you consider it a CrowdStroke or ClownStrike, the world was impacted by essentially a security vendor releasing a software update. And unbeknownst, we woke up wee hours of July 19th to blue screens of death. So we're going to discuss that today. I'm very interested in Phil and Jeremy's perspective on what that incident did to the community and maybe the lasting effects of it. Right. So who wants to give a 30-second pitch of what the CrowdStrike incident was?
Jim? No. I had to ask.
I'm the layman here.
I know.
I'm here to ask the dumb questions.
30-second pitch.
How about we start with what is CrowdStrike?
Great. So CrowdStrike is an EDR, endpoint detection and response vendor. So their product, Falcon Strike, which is part of their managed detection and response, think of it as antivirus on steroids, right? So it prevents bad things from happening on your computer systems, Windows, Macs, Linux.
But not as passive.
It's not as passive.
Right.
It is very active, right? So that R in EDR is response, right? So the EDR agent is programmed. It uses heuristics. It uses AI. It uses other non-signature based mechanisms to identify bad things and stop it.
Now, is this something a mom and pop might use, or is this really just the big dogs that are using something like this?
It impacted enterprises of all shapes and sizes. More that small to medium sized business is probably better off than the larger enterprises where they don't have resources, because if you subscribe to CrowdStrike's MDR, their managed detection and response, you've got a CrowdStrike security operations center, watching your back.
Yeah.
Right? So when the Falcon agent identifies something, it quarantines it.
And that's their tool, right?
That's their tool. That's the agent that was updated on July 19th that caused the havoc.
And to clarify too, this wasn't a cybersecurity attack that caused this. It was a software issue on their side that basically shut everybody down. It wasn't an active attack on CrowdStrike.
Correct. In the early hours, we didn't know. We thought, could this be a security incident? Until the whole world came together and realized, okay, this is impacting every Windows CrowdStrike installation, not just a certain industry vertical or certain type of business. It was all their clients.
So I was scanning the incident report that technician Eric sent over, and I was scanning for words that I knew. And there was something about in the code, there were 21 fields that were expecting a value, but somebody made an error, and only 20 of those had code representing whatever field they were trying to populate. So by missing that one, that's what caused. Beyond that, technically, I have no clue what happened.
Yeah, they took it one more.
Okay.
It went one louder, and boom.
Okay.
Went to 11.
21, George. 21.
21.
Yes.
No, so what it was is, yes, when they updated the content channel update, there was a null value. And so what happens is when that update tried to update the agent and it was loading that content into the Windows kernel, for which it has to operate at the lowest level of the operating system in order to intersect all the processes that might be doing bad things. So when you were trying to put null value into a memory register, Windows says you don't do that.
Right.
So it just bellied up.
Okay. So I guess the next question then is, how is something like CrowdStrike so instrumental to other systems? I mean, I know we'll get into, some of the major clients that were taken down. Jeremy's got some personal stories on that one. But how is it so instrumental to those other systems that everything crashed? It wasn't, that whatever CrowdStrike, whatever service they were offering took down everything else.
Well,
was it that much of a foundational element of what they were doing?
It is, but I want to go back to your first question about whether or not this was a security incident. Right, so it certainly was not a breach.
Right.
It wasn't a malicious action, but I think if you poll the community, you would get a 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a security incident? Yes or no? And one side of the house will say it is, because if you think about the CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity,
Mm-hmm.
availability, everything we build cyber around,
Mm-hmm.
this incident caused a business continuity. There was
Right.
a lack of availability of Windows systems.
But also, if it's a cybersecurity tool that's no longer working, now you are more vulnerable because it's not detecting things it should be detecting.
Potentially, if those systems were operable,
Right.
then yes, they would have been highly
Okay.
vulnerable if the agent wasn't working. So I personally believe that it was not a security incident, but it certainly was a business continuity issue.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So depending on how organizations were prepared to respond to it, they either had very, very quick recovery times,
Mm-hmm.
or, certain airlines were. I mean, they didn't get recovered until the very, very end of
Right.
sort of
Like
that,
days, wasn't it?
Days.
curve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Days
Yeah.
later. Yes.
So your second question, Jim, of whether or not this was such a foundational control, why did it impact so many systems? So generally, if you have an EDR, endpoint detection response solution, installed in your environment, you likely are not running an antivirus solution, right? It's fulfilling that need.
Yep.
So think about where you would install antivirus.
Mm-hmm.
Best practice would be you'd put it on every Windows computer.
Yep.
If even in those computers where there's very little user interaction, right? So think the airports where you've got the reader boards and the informational boards. There's not an end user interacting with that system, but it's on the network, and as a point of detection, you would want to know if that system was compromised with malware, or if ransomware got on the network and it was trying to laterally move and break into those systems.
Mm-hmm.
EDR would be your early warning system.
Okay.
So the fact that it was installed everywhere, which I do want to ask a question later about, is it appropriate to put that kind of tool everywhere? Because if we think about layered approach, and there's certain tools that you want on every system, but there are certain systems that have little value,
Mm-hmm. But the question also comes up: how did an update go out without being tested or
Well, it was
validated?
Tested. It was tested. The system that they use in their SDLC, their Secure Development Lifecycle, that tests all their content updates, they discovered a bug. So that environment had been updated, and it wasn't fully validated or tested against all the content updates.
Okay.
So it wasn't that the brains of Falcon was updated. It was literally a content. So going back to that antivirus analogy, it's like they updated a signature database, but it's not quite signatures. It's a way that they integrate their AI engine. So they call it a content update. It happens every day. Sometimes it happens multiple times a day. And what we've learned in this situation was that CrowdStrike didn't give customers the ability to schedule or tune or change when those content updates got applied. If you were a Falcon Strike update, if you're a Falcon Strike user, you got the update when CrowdStrike released it.
Right. Not at your own convenience.
On a Thursday night going into the weekend, right?
On a Thursday night.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is that common
that's
practice?
That's one of their criticisms.
Right.
Because you can control how often the agent gets updated, right? The actual EDR piece of
To
it.
fit within your business model or, your customer demand or whatever it might be.
Sure, right? So all you folks that work in IT, you know that you always have some IT-friendly users, and they might be your guinea pigs. So whenever you roll out new software, you're testing new configuration settings, you're going to roll it out to that subset of users first, because they're going to be a little bit more forgiving in the event that you break something, but they're also going to provide you feedback on how things are working. Well, ideally, you would do that same with your EDR updates, right? You've got systems that are very critical, right? Think your ERP systems, right? You're going to cater how you update those environments. You're just not going to let a third-party vendor decide when things get updated.
Right.
And these updates happened in the kernel layer versus like the application layer. So when anything goes wrong in the kernel, the whole system crashes. Versus if it were in the application layer, it just would be the application that would crash or error out, and the system would still be
the
usable.
user would get an error,
Right.
but at least it would, the base operating system would continue to function.
Yes.
Which begs the question, knowing that EDR vendors have access to Ring 0, the kernel level of Windows, is it as much a Microsoft issue for not making Windows resilient enough? Right? If Windows identifies a blue screen of death, and it continued to do so, it seems like there could be checks that, maybe on your third reboot, it says, we're going to put you in recovery mode automatically, or roll back to a good known state.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
I guess I feel like there's some responsibility or something that Microsoft could do or could have done to maybe have additional checks in place for updates to the kernel, because it's such a sensitive update to that space. I don't know, I guess, what that might be or anything. I'm not so techy to get to that part of the.
I mean, surely they've
systems,
changed
but-
something going forward. If something like that could take down so much, I don't know.
Well, I don't know what Microsoft could do in short order.
Yeah.
Right? If they're going to give EDR vendors access to play in the kernel, we always have this risk.
But that's another point. Has that tipped off any, people with bad intentions?
Are
How
threat
easy it is to
actors now-
take down so much? I mean, did that just put CrowdStrike on the map as a huge target that one tiny little change can take down tons of huge industries?
When we think supply chain risk, EDR vendors they're a prime target. If an adversary could compromise their environment and push out an update that would enable ransomware, that would be devastating. At least this issue, we had a workaround. It was a manual fix, and it took time, but we knew it was repairable. If it was a ransomware type situation,
Oh, that would have been bad.
we'd still be recovering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So any personal impacts from this CrowdStrike?
I know Jeremy's got some stories on that.
Oh yeah, I've got a few stories. One leads to another, actually. So it was a Thursday night, Friday morning, right? And a few days later, I was supposed to do some travel, and did not realize I had a Delta flight booked.
Business travel.
Business travel, yes. Right. But didn't realize my flight was Delta until Monday morning, the day of the flight, when I woke up to a text telling me the flight was canceled. And I was like, wait, what? Oh, it's CrowdStrike still. And it just hit me. So one of the first things I did was actually call George and said, hey, George, what do I do?
And how bad do you want to do that training, Jeremy?
Yes. It was bad enough that I did make the 13-hour drive, during which time I had a lot of time to think and ponder about what happened and the impact it carried everywhere. And then I got bored, so I started calling friends and family and found out I had plenty of friends who were also impacted. A good friend of mine was working on a major client deliverable at the time of the blue screen. And this big project, right in the middle of it, his machine blue screened on him, and he just kind of dropped his jaw. I almost said a word there that I shouldn't have said. But it was a jaw-dropping moment because he thought he lost all the work, and the deliverable was due like following day kind of thing.
Did your friend have the ability to invoke the fix, or did he have to wait for his IT team to circle around to him?
I think he got lucky. So his machine went blue screen, he restarted it, and it came back up. He got lucky.
Wow.
He had coworkers whose machines blue screened on them as well, and they were down for a couple days.
How quickly did they publish what the fix was?
So the immediate fix or the manual fix.
What was the fix, I guess? Yeah.
So the fix was to basically boot your system into recovery mode and then either rename or delete the content file that was updated.
So did CrowdStrike send that out to all of their customers and say, hey, here's what you need to do?
They
how
were
was that
pretty
message pushed
vocal
out?
about providing regularly produced guidance.
Mm-hmm.
And then folks like AWS and Azure, Microsoft Azure, released tools that if you had CrowdStrike in cloud instances, that they could do that fix for you, or they could do some automation so that you could do hundreds of servers very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, think about where people work these days. There's a lot of remote work.
Right.
And if you are following good practice, you've got least privilege, which means that your folks aren't going to be able to boot into Windows in recovery mode as local administrators.
Right.
In order to delete
They'd
the
have to
file.
wait for somebody to come through.
They would have to wait
Right.
for an administrator who had the privileges to log in to
Yeah.
delete that file.
So in some cases, then it was worse for bigger companies because they were
Following practice.
less central, a little more centralized in their IT practices, whereas smaller companies that did have access to do that change up, individually.
Correct. And then there's the BitLocker situation, right? So Windows, Microsoft Windows, the native encryption protection is BitLocker. A lot of enterprises enable it for compliancy purposes. If you lose the laptop, it gets lost, stolen, you don't have to worry about sensitive data getting in the wrong hands. Well, if your domain controllers, which house all the recovery keys, are blue screening, you've got to recover the keys before you can recover the clients. So that caused quite a few organizations to stall their updates.
Right.
And that was a situation. I was listening to another podcast that was talking about this situation. That podcast had a person who had emailed in about this BitLocker situation, and he was sharing these thoughts. He said, I work at a company that uses CrowdStrike. I thought you would appreciate some insight. Thankfully, we were only minimally affected, as many of our Windows users were at a team building event, et cetera, et cetera. So only a handful of workstations were affected. However, the recovery was hampered by the common knowledge that the BitLocker recovery key would be needed to boot into safe mode. When you try to boot into safe mode in Windows, you're asked for the BitLocker recovery key. Most knowledge-based articles state that you need to enter the BitLocker key at this point. But this is not required. It's just not obvious and not well known how to bypass this. Then he goes into kind of the way to the steps to take. And then he goes on and says, I think Microsoft deserves a lot of blame for the poor recovery process when safe mode is needed. They should not be asking for BitLocker keys if they are not needed. At the bare minimum, they need to make this knowledge much more well known so system admins who won't have BitLocker keys can still boot into safe mode when disaster strikes. So again, kind of going back to your thoughts on who's at fault, who else could be at fault.
Who could share some of the blame?
Share some of the blame, exactly, with that. So yeah, I found that interesting in terms of BitLocker.
So another good practice that we preach in cyber is that we do updates. Update often, update quickly, and in many cases, enable auto updates. Right? And those organizations that had auto updates enabled, or because CrowdStrike was following that practice and updates their content aggressively, that caused some of the issue. Do you think that organizations are going to backslide on that and change their patching or updating strategies?
I don't think so. No. I think the reason you update and the reason you put those patches in, most of the time you can trust the patch. How often do we have incidents like this? Yeah, where
they happen from time to time,
and it's expected.
And it is expected. There's thousands of different configurations, and updates aren't going to be perfect.
I think to me the issue is, as a cybersecurity group and a cybersecurity podcast, the question's always, what could I do to prevent it? And in this case, I don't think there is. And because it was a one-off, if CrowdStrike has the ability to send out an update that crashes everybody, there's nothing individually that I could do to stop that. Now, are there policies that CrowdStrike could put in place that might lessen the chance of that happening? Probably. Are they going to? I don't know.
They have.
They've
already implemented a number of remediations in that regard. So now clients or customers can choose when their content updates happen.
Okay.
And they can put
so
them
then could
in
the client,
groups.
could their customer technically like sandbox it themselves, see if it does anything it shouldn't, and then push it out?
And does that reduce their security posture by doing so? Right. So if they wait an extra 12 hours, 24 hours for content updates, which could be emergent, and protect them from whatever is going on in the world, are they going to get bitten because they've increased their update window?
So I guess that's the risk. I mean, you can stage it, update to a number of users one day, then the next set of users the next day until you're complete. But then, what's the risk in that versus updating everybody automatically at once when the patch is ready? So just some decisions that you could potentially make there.
I'm glad I don't have to make those decisions personally.
Yeah. Well, and I think it begs the question too, is in today's society, it's pointing the finger and the blame, is there any legal ramification that's going to come to CrowdStrike for shutting down most of American travel, globally?
Global travel.
Yeah, for multiple days, not to mention the other businesses that were taken offline. I wonder how much of this is going to come back to them. Before we started, I was looking up their stock price during all this. They dropped from it was right around $400 to about $200 in about a week per share. So 50% of their stock value.
They lost.
It's bouncing back a little bit now, but I mean, that's just the financial hit to them, as a publicly traded company. But going forward, I wonder if any of these other companies are going to, reduce business or go somewhere else, or
So,
not to mention the legal ramifications or any sort of litigious activity that happens as a result.
a lot of their business are in regulated industries, healthcare, finance. As you know, if I were to put my CISO hat on, would I, even though personally I have strong confidence in their product, I mean they are one of the best CDRs, certainly in the top 5. If presented with, all right, it's time to renew Falcon Strike, do I make the decision for the organization to stay with CrowdStrike, knowing that they potentially caused us millions of dollars of downtime? Or do I say, you know what, I I've lost trust in that,
Right.
and I have just from a pure CYA, right?
Yeah.
So if something were to happen again at CrowdStrike, right?
Oh, if something happens again, George, they're in trouble.
And they're in trouble now. right?
They are in trouble now, but if something happens again, that's strike two.
It is strike
Right.
two, but will security leaders want to get off the platform before that is a possibility?
Is redundancy possible? If somebody running CrowdStrike, is there something else that they could run simultaneously that if one went down, the other would still function? Or keep them alive?
Maybe from a detection response, right?
Yeah.
So the purpose of why you would have Falcon Strike, maybe you could run another one. They would likely compete with each other.
Right.
But if they cause another kernel panic,
Right.
there's no resiliency there.
Right.
Right.
And so that's where you're just hoping that they're operationally CrowdStrike can get their act together and not do that again.
Which there was a bit of I don't know if it's bashing on the socials. So George Kurtz, the CEO and co-founder of CrowdStrike, was also the CTO of McAfee when McAfee had the exact same problem. So they released an update a decade or so ago, and it blue screened a lot of their client systems. So you would think that you would learn from previous experience, but CrowdStrike's a big company. I mean, people are claiming George has got to go. He needs to be fired. CEO should be accountable for their product and their processes, and I don't necessarily agree with that.
Is it the nature of the software? Is it the nature of the that level of protection that it is easy to get, and maybe not easy, but it opens the door for a shutdown like that based off of a software error, that it's such a invasive, and I don't mean invasive in a bad way, but such an invasive software for the company that it's the nature of the business that something little could take it down just based off human error.
Kernel programming is hard, right? And people who downplay it, it's like, well, they are professionals. They're the experts. They should know better. So, maybe more thorough testing was needed other than their automated process that they had relied on for many, many years. But yeah, it's just slightest mistake at ring zero and the system's going to crash.
Does insurance exist for this type of downtime? I mean, there's cyber insurance that covers an actual event, but is there insurance that could cover? I mean, maybe there.
I would guess probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
there
a matter
are.
of what are you willing to pay for insurance again. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is America. You can get whatever you want to pay for.
exactly.
exactly. So do you think CrowdStrike will come back from this?
I mean, I'm sure they will. Like we were just saying, if it happens again, I think it's going to be a lot harder for them to recover. But I think there's still going to be fallout from the companies that were affected on, trying to regain some of those losses. How that happens, who knows what their contracts look like or whether or not they can. But I don't think it's done, like we were saying. But I think it's going to take some reputation rebuilding and trust gaining. But no, if it happened again, like Jeremy was saying, I think it's way more likely that they wouldn't survive that.
And I think the response was quick and helpful. I think from other things I've heard and seen too is their support center is second to none, and they're ready to help. They took responsibility for the issue, and they provided the support needed and to get the support out there.
They were very transparent, right?
Right.
They didn't try to not take blame. I mean, they owned up to the issue immediately.
Yeah.
And they were vocal about it. With like Phil was saying, with those things you need to do, they put it out as soon as they knew what it was, because there were other people out on the web, wherever you want to look. Oh, well, you can do this or you can do that, and that'll get you by. And you don't know what those people are telling you. That they might be setting you up for failure.
Oh yeah,
at that point.
And within hours of that, there were multiple malicious sites, domains that were registered, right? Because knowing that there's going to be misinformation and people are just going to be Googling, and if they can get that SEO on top of the link, and boom, if you can
Trying to panic and get everything. But
here's
who knows what you're
the
opening your
CrowdStrike
doors
update
to.
to fix your issue, and you download it and you ransomware it yourself.
Right.
So if you had the ear of your constituents, so your students, Jeremy, if you could share a message with them about what's a learning tidbit from the CrowdStrike situation, what do you think you might share with them? I'm going to ask you the same question of your clients, Phil.
Oh, what would I share with them? One, like, you definitely don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. You know, if all of your machines were on that and impacted, you're done until you have the time and person power to actually get out and put that fix together.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Is there, like, with teaching people, I mean, obviously there's the importance of backup comes into this, but like you were saying, the BitLocker could have prevented you from doing that. So, but is that still good hygiene, good practice? I mean, I know it is, but like in this scenario, would that have made a difference for somebody who was affected, their ability to boot from backup quickly?
Well, so for that full week following the incident, I was teaching incident response, and every day we talked about CrowdStrike. And I just said, what if this was ransomware? And they all went, ooh, that would, okay. Yeah, I get where this is. This was bad. And so from that standpoint, it's definitely a learning experience, I think, not just for students, but for all of us. Yeah.
So Phil, if you could give a word of advice to your clients about lessons learned from this CrowdStrike incident, what might they be?
I think it speaks to having a solid incident response team ready to make the fix and get going on things. Anecdotally, I had seen an article or something about somebody who had a company, maybe 500 endpoints that were affected by the CrowdStrike. Their team learned about it at whatever it was, 12:30 a.m. the morning of, had 95% of their endpoints fixed by start of the day and 100% fixed by 10 a.m.
That's impressive.
So if you have a team that works well together, that can get the information they need from the vendor and get going on things, super important, which speaks to one of the things we talk about in our assessment, and that's tabletop exercises, getting your team together to just walk through what you would do if something happened, and not wait for that something to happen before, you don't want your test to be the actual event. You want to be able to test and think through and walk through as a team how you would respond to things.
Well, and it's impossible to predict every scenario, but I feel like this just got added to a lot of people's lists of a potential scenario.
Exactly.
But like, so that client you're talking about, was that by their own creativity that they were able to patch it, or were they working directly with CrowdStrike? Did they have somebody that they could contact to figure out the issue quickly, or were they kind of just fumbling through it and found something that worked? And
yeah, this wasn't my client, but it was. Okay. I believe they had worked through the CrowdStrike website and had been paying attention to see.
Okay.
They were able to identify the issue, that I believe that it was a CrowdStrike thing, and then from that
pointed towards CrowdStrike, which had some resources available, and
as far as I understand it, yep.
Yeah, they released some bootable USB images that you could boot the computer to the USB drive, and it would automate the fix. So about as quickly as you would reboot the system, it would be fixed. But if you had 500 of them and it took you a couple of minutes to interact with each system, it adds up. And when you think about 8.5 million devices globally, I imagine communication was bad too, right? So when we think about how IT teams communicate, they're using Slack, they're using Discord, they're using Teams. But if they can't get to the
device that
their
they
workstation
communicate
to
on
with each other, and so having out of band, I mean, teams that communicate well probably are using personal devices and out of band stuff. But there's always those folks on the team that I'm not connecting my personal phone to the work network. So.
Well, that only makes sense too why some of the airlines were the biggest affected, because literally spread out over the world, and we're companies that are a little more local and centralized, and maybe have people local. It's easier.
Did you hear why Southwestern was not impacted? And I didn't know if this is truthful or not.
I heard
that they're still running Windows XP.
Yeah.
I heard that
or
as well.
Windows 3.1 or 95 or something.
Yeah.
old.
So, something that's only going to come back and bite them at some
My
point.
seats are cheap.
Yeah. I guess. But, all right. Anything else we should mention about CrowdStrike?
No, I feel way more knowledgeable on it. Just asking the question. So no, I'm good.
Jeremy, Phil?
No, I think it's a good. Yeah, it was good conversation, and yeah.
This was fun.
Well, we're going to have many, many more episodes, Jeremy, so.
The golden mic is still up for grabs. So.
That's right. Well, thank you again for listening to the CyberTAP podcast. This is episode 2 of our new season with George and Jim. While I still have your attention, I want to share that we do education for corporate partners and for other higher ed institutions. So if you are looking to upskill and reskill your cyber education, give us a look. We also do professional services. So if you need a vulnerability assessment or pen test, come look at us. We'd love to discuss it with you. Reach out to us on LinkedIn and X. We'd love to engage.